Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. We are joined once again by Jim Merrills, who is going to be guiding us through the final 3 episodes of Sabbath School Boot Camp for this quarter. We're going to be talking about Joseph Part 1 today. We're going to talk about Joseph Part 2 next week, and then we're going to talk about Israel in Egypt. So we are in the final stretch of our discussion of the book of Genesis. It has been fun. I have learned an awful lot during this, and I'm sure you have too at home. We hope that it has helped you guys have better Sabbath School classes. Now, this lesson this week is called Joseph, Master of Dreams. And that is a fantastic title. It's hinting at what is to come. It's a great bit of foreshadowing because we don't actually talk about the dreams until Thursday. So if you're teaching this lesson, get there. All right, don't get so bogged down. Get to the dreams. It's really interesting stuff. Sometimes I know you have really good discussions that you don't quite make it to the end of the lesson. That's usually fine, but sometimes there's something really important on Thursday, and I think personally that's the case in this week. So whatever you got to do, make sure you have enough time left over for Thursday and talk about these dreams that Joseph is going to be interpreting. We're going to talk about those and what it means to be a master of dreams when we get on to Thursday. But for now, we are going to go start on Sunday. I'm going to flip it over to Jim because this is titled Family Troubles. Jim, what's going on with Joseph and his family here?
Okay, so I am really perplexed. I open up the lesson on Sunday, and the Sabbath School lesson reads as follows, quote, troubles, this time from inside the family. Haven't we been reading week after week after week, troubles from inside the family? What is new here? How is this time different? I was perplexed by that line.
Is there any other kind of trouble?
Well, not in Genesis. I mean, from Adam and Eve, every story has been from inside the family. So
yes.
I just had to smile when I read that one.
Oh, man.
And the story remains the same. What do we read in the text this week? That he loved his son more than all the others. Isn't that the same thing we've been reading in story after story, that we always have this favorite child of the mother or the dad? So this is so interesting. The book of beginnings has the same theme in every story from Adam and Eve to the close of the book.
Yes. I wrote in all caps in my notes, this family needs counseling. Like, they really do. I mean, Jacob was the unloved one, at least by his father, Isaac. Isaac, of course, was the loved one. And then Jacob was the unloved one, at least by his father. And then, it turns out that Jacob is doing the same thing to his kids. It's this generational dysfunction that keeps getting handed down. And it kind of keeps getting worse, though, because what did Ishmael do about not being the favorite? Nothing really. What does Jacob do? He schemes. What does Joseph do? Nothing, because he's the favorite. But the unloved ones, it's not just one loved, one unloved. It's one loved and a bunch of them unloved. And the scheming is going to intensify here, as we're going to see. But this family needs counseling.
I would have called the page "Parental Fail Again."
It's accurate. I mean, you look at this and you're like, we're doing the same things over and over and over and over again. We're not learning from the past, not on a kind of the level of the dynasty of the family line. I mean, they're individually, we see growth in Jacob's life and Abraham's life. We see growth, but we're not learning as a family unit here. And oftentimes the growth comes too late.
And I think there is something definitely here to apply to ourselves. I mean, we often quote the Bible when we talk about generation after generation dealing with the sins of the father and such. But as you know, Vicki and I have been involved in counseling with substance abuse over many years. And then, I've gone into prevention of that. But even in substance abuse, we will see where children will have such a, for lack of better words here, they'll be so offended by or turned off by perhaps the parents' abuse of alcohol. And so they will be the teetotalers. But then you come to the next generation, and the parents were such rigid, strict teetotalers in terms of their approach to alcohol that all of a sudden now you have the third generation that comes up with alcohol abuse. And then the parents wonder, well, how could that happen? We never touched it. Well, these stories, I mean, we just find that generation after generation, they appear to learn something from their parents that isn't so good, and they hang on to it whether they realize it or not.
Yes, yes. And I think it introduces a bit of complexity in terms of how we view these, because we paint with a broad brush over these patriarchs. They are all great men of faith, and they're good people. Sure, they have their faults, but they're good people. And as we see Jacob, I mean, Jacob is a guy who wrestled with God and overcame and secured the promise of God. I mean, these are all great things. He saw the angels ascending and descending on the ladder. I mean, all these beautiful moments. And yet here he is playing favorites with his children to a point where you have to wonder why. It's not an innocent little thing where, like, I like this one a little bit more than this one. You see the hatred that your other sons have for the son whom you love. And you just keep going. You're sending your loved son to go spy on the unloved sons. Like, how do you think that that's going to make them feel? How do you think that this is going to turn out? It's just boiling and boiling and boiling, and he keeps doing it and doing it and doing it, just seemingly like he doesn't care. And how do you wrestle with the legacy of these people who are people of faith on one hand, and yet on the other hand, you're like, how stupid are you? How cruel are you that you would treat your children this way, that you would treat your family this way? I mean, look, we're all imperfect. Even if you really, really love this one son and really, really, really love your first wife, at least treat your second wife with decency. At least treat your other children, her children, with respect and with care. You know what I mean? Like, make an effort here. And it makes you wonder. It made me wonder. Because we have a history with Joseph here, and I just want to just briefly get into this, okay? After Joseph was born, Joseph was the seventh son born to Jacob, but the first one born to Rachel, right? That's the wife that Jacob loved. He was Rachel's first son. After Joseph was born, that's when the Bible says in chapter 30 that Jacob decided it's time to leave Laban and go home. And then when Jacob is going to meet Esau, he divides up his family, you remember. And he puts his concubines and their kids in behind him. And then he puts behind them, he puts Leah and her sons. And then behind Leah, he puts Rachel and Joseph. In other words, furthest away from Esau. So if things go south, they can get away. They are most likely to get away. You can't put Rachel and Leah together with their sons in the back. Like, he's making it very clear before Joseph does anything. Before Joseph can even walk, he's making it very clear that Joseph is my favorite, and that Rachel is my favorite, and the rest of you guys mean less to me than they do.
So what you're saying is, if you do go with two wives, love them equally.
Yeah, love them equally. That's the advice I'm giving you. All right. I think I'm rubbing off on you a little bit, Jim. But here's what I'm trying to get at with this whole thing. Is when you begin acting this way as the father, you gotta wonder, do the sons go avenge Dinah in Shechem because they're acting out against their father, who they see as kind of too impotent, too passive to do anything, to do what needs to be done? Like, he doesn't care about them. He doesn't care about Dinah's honor. He just wants to, he's got Joseph, so what else matters? So he's not going to go avenge their sister and make it right. So they have to go do it. And is this why Reuben slept with his father's concubine? We see this story. We kind of didn't really cover it in the lesson. But Reuben sleeps with his father's concubine. Is this a way of him showing his displeasure and his disrespect to his father because he feels like his father doesn't care? I mean, we get on these other guys and what they did was wrong. But, I mean, sometimes I think these people act out because of the sins of the father or the mother, but in this case, the father, and not caring about them. Look, I don't want to go into this dark place, okay? I was just reading an article about the father of the shooter at the school in Texas. He hadn't talked to his son in a month. He blamed his ex-wife for not providing school supplies for their son. But you can just tell from the interview, this guy is completely disconnected from his son and from his daughter, who joined the Navy to get away from the family. His father's living with a girlfriend somewhere outside of town. I mean, he's just not connected at all. And it's not his fault for what his son did, but created this dysfunctional environment, or helped create it, that led to the son acting out. And I mean, we got to take this stuff seriously. We're seeing this play out in the present day. These are not just old stories that belong in the past. This is serious stuff.
Yeah, and clearly Jacob is, you've said it, but he's clearly disconnected in so many ways. Like you say, he puts Leah and her children before Rachel and her children when they're faced with potential death. Okay, there's one issue. He's had no problem treating Joseph with favor in front of his sons, which actually led me to laugh this week, as I'm reminded that at one point he rebukes Joseph for saying what he does in front of his brothers. It's like, that's how you raise a kid.
So, yeah.
But hey, here's one thing I do want to throw in. It's just a little tidbit, but I'm currently on a roll on studies with the Promised Land in Jerusalem, and especially as it applies to futurism and dispensationalism today. And I just wanted to point out that as we open chapter 37, verse 1, we do read that Jacob now dwells in the land. It's a little ironic that things have settled down. They are in the Promised Land, but they can be in the Promised Land and things are not so perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But this land is important. It's important as we progress towards the end of this lesson, so I'll come back to it again, but it's the opening text, and the land is important. So I'll come back to that later.
Yeah. Yes. I like that we get to know how old Joseph is. It says he was 17 years old here. And, you see a note and you wonder, oh, this is probably some ambiguous Hebrew. It's really not. He's 17. So we know how old he is. He's young. Nevertheless, we have this image of Joseph as if he's kind of like Daniel. They have some parallels in their lives. Daniel, there's no recorded sins that Daniel committed. And it seems like there's no recorded sins that Joseph has committed. He's just an innocent kid caught up in his father's world.
But he lacks some wisdom.
Yeah, he's definitely an accomplished. People when we look at 17, we think, well, a 17-year-old today, what do they know? In terms of the dysfunction of their family and how to navigate that and stuff. But 17 back then, I mean, he could have been married by now. He's a young kid, especially when they live 180 years old. Okay, he's definitely a young kid,
right?
But he's not he's not a child. He's not a child. When his father sends him to spy on his brothers, and he sees how his brothers react with anger, maybe he does. I don't know to the degree to which he fully comprehends what he's a party to, but there's got to be something there. And he's wearing the robe that his father makes him. And I know we like to call it, in the words of Andrew Lloyd Webber, a Technicolor dream coat. But there's no reason to think that. I mean, it comes from the Septuagint. That's where it says it has multiple colors. It doesn't say it had every color in the rainbow. It doesn't say how prominent those colors were. It could have been like, I don't know, a base color and then two other colors. I mean, we have no idea. The point isn't what it looked like. The point is what it signified. And I think Dukan had something really interesting here when he said that the coat signified Jacob's desire to treat Joseph as the firstborn. And this is really profound if this is true, because Joseph is the firstborn of Rachel. And if that's what Jacob was interested in, then that means that he didn't think Leah's children counted. And could you imagine being Reuben, or being one of these other children, one of these other brothers, and seeing Joseph every day wearing that coat, knowing that it is a symbol of him as the heir, even though he's way younger than the rest of them, as Joseph is the heir, as dad sees him as the firstborn, deserving of the firstborn blessing and all of these things. And actually he'll eventually get it later on, as Dukan notes. But that's not the point. The point is they're got to live with this irritation, and Joseph's wearing this thing. And you think to yourself, Jacob is the one who knows for sure that just because you were born first doesn't mean you're the firstborn, right? He knows.
Right.
And so he's like, why not do it again? I stole it from my brother. Why can't I give it to whatever son I want and make him the firstborn? And there's no recorded sins of Joseph. You say that he's at least lacks wisdom here early on, which is definitely true. He could also be, we don't know for sure. I mean, he could be a snotty brat at this point. I mean, he certainly lacks wisdom, but he's parading this coat around. I don't know to what level of control he has over whether he wears it or not. Maybe his dad makes him. I don't know. But now, wearing it around is a constant source of irritation.
For our friends here who enjoy, those insightful little word studies, something that I appreciated that Duchamp brought out in his commentary is that this tunic, for, lack of other words, that this tunic is actually akin to a princess garment. And he refers to the fact that this word comes up over in 2 Samuel 13. But he also points out that this word in the Akkadian refers to a ceremonial robe that was worn by a goddess. Now, you might wonder, why would we have the potential here of a robe from a goddess, a female deity, that's also being worn by this young man? And to that, I would simply throw out that when we come to the revelation, I'm using that word, when we come to the revelation of Jesus Christ at the end of the book, at the end of the Bible, we find the word Nike, which was a Greek goddess. We find that Greek word associated with Christ over and over and over again in the opening visions of Revelation. So there's my 2 cents word study for today.
I think Nike would be a great name for a dog.
Ooh, I'll have to give that some thought.
Yeah, sure you are. All right.
Nike? Yep, she's laying there real quiet.
All right. Well, next quarter, maybe we should do this video with Nike as well.
She enjoys listening to you. I hope all of our viewers do.
Okay, good. Okay. If you're done then with Sunday, I'm ready to go on to Monday here. Let's do it.
There's a few things there, but now these pages don't move real smooth. I mean, they're choppy, and so I don't know. I have under Sunday. There's also the reference here to his dream about the sheaves and such.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
I just have this note here that here you have the dream of the sheaves. And then there's the similarity later with Pharaoh's dream of the heads of grain, both of them referring to something that is a staple crop, something that's an economic staple, something we're dependent on. So I'll just throw that out there. We might come back to that a little bit later when we discuss Pharaoh.
Yeah, I was going to say the dreams of Thursday, but I mean, it's important to point it out that we have the first one here. And I mean, clearly the gall, I would say from the brother's perspective is, not only does dad think you're the firstborn, but now you're claiming that God has chosen you too to rule over us. Like, I mean, the audacity to, it's one thing if you're caught up in dad's scheme. It's another thing you think that God is behind your scheme. I mean,
and keep in mind, you've got dad who is doing the interpreting of Joseph's dream.
Yes. And he gets a gentle rebuke, but I don't know if it's because of the dream per se, or just the injudicious way in which he told people about it. Like, dude, keep it to yourself, or tell me privately, or something. And I think it maybe it gives a little bit of a hint to dad here about the monster that he's creating. It's like, well, your mother and your brothers really come and bow down before you. I don't know what this before. Well, I don't know if this is before Benjamin or not. I'm kind of curious because his mother died giving birth to Benjamin. So, maybe sometimes you still refer to a deceased spouse even after they're gone, just to make a point here, or maybe she had not yet passed away. I'm not entirely sure on that timeline. But anyways, he has a dream here, and these dreams, of course, are an indication of something from God. But I think thus far in the story, I'm on team brothers at this point, because I think anyone else in this situation would be like, who would side with Joseph? I mean, who would believe that this dream is from God? Because the dude is just so full of himself. I mean, that's their perspective. Dad is so full of Joseph. It just turns you off to opening your mind to this.
17 years of drip, drip, drip,
Yes.
It's starting to drive a few of them insane.
Yeah, and especially because they're out in the fields, he's not. He's got nothing to do but spy on them, it seems. And it's just, they're the ones working and keeping the family alive. It's not Dad, it's not Joseph, it's them. And anyways, one can imagine the feeling that they go through. So don't be so quick because of what the brothers are about to do to completely fail to identify with their concerns here. So that leads us to the attack on Joseph. Dukan references Acts chapter 7, where it says that the patriarchs, meaning the brothers here, were jealous of Joseph. Undoubtedly, that's true. But again, who wouldn't be jealous in this situation? You guys have been there longer, worked harder, and weren't shown this kind of favoritism, this lack of love. But anyways,
and there's one thing here. This story shows, and Christ just comes right out and says it, that there is a direct relationship between hate and murder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hate gone unchecked can only lead to one possible conclusion.
Yeah.
And I liked it in Dukan's book there, the supplemental book, where he points out that they were prepared to, in his words, eliminate Joseph, thus hoping to change their fate, their destiny.
Yeah. Yeah, because if he's not around, someone else has got to be firstborn, right? And I think
of them. Yeah,
well, at least one of them. They're kind of somewhat unified. But it's a challenging thing. Obviously, murdering this boy is not the right response. But what would you do in this situation? How would you seek redress? It's clear Dad isn't listening to you. It's clear your mom, Leah, doesn't have any influence with Dad. Joseph doesn't have to listen to you. He keeps making you look bad. What do you do? Where do you go in this situation to get justice for yourself? From their perspective, justice for themselves.
I think the hate is just too deep at this point.
It is.
That word eliminate is all that's left in their minds.
Yeah, because I would imagine as I work through the problem, what other options do you have? You either put up with it or you kill them because no one's listening to you. No one's gonna help. Dad's not gonna help. Mom's not gonna help or can't help. What are you gonna do? So,
not only that, but Dukan uses that word fate by eliminating him. The day will never come that the prophecy is fulfilled.
Yeah.
So, in a hope to eliminate, in a hope to change the future, you eliminate a certain person.
Yeah. I suppose there's some perspective here that, hey guys, y'all are incredibly rich, and whether or not one of you gets a double portion and is the firstborn or not, y'all going to be fine. But, did you really want Joseph ruling over you guys as the next patriarch of the clan? Yeah, they couldn't imagine that would be a good idea.
Nope.
So the turning point is here. Everything up until this point is kind of background, right? His brothers were jealous of him, and his father kept in mind what Joseph has said. So, his father is like, that's, I'm going to rebuke him, but I'm also going to be thinking about this. This stream is interesting. We're going to find out what it means. That's kind of the end of the first section of this chapter. And then it turns here where they had gone to graze their father's flock near Shechem, scene of a very well-known crime a few chapters ago. And so, here Israel or Jacob is saying to Joseph, your brothers are grazing near Shechem. Come, I will send you to them. I'm ready, Joseph replies. Right? I'm in on it. So Jacob says, go check on the welfare and bring me word. Now, this is not in the backyard. Shechem's about 50 miles away from where they are in Hebron, the Valley of Hebron, depending on exactly where they are. It's about 50 miles away. It's a long journey. It's not like look out the back window and see how your brothers are doing. You had to travel far with these flocks. And, I don't know exactly what Jacob is wanting to find out. If they were attacked or something, you think they would have sent a messenger home. What does Jacob want out of this situation? Send the kid 50 miles there and 50 miles back to say they're fine? Uh, Goodness gracious.
Yeah, I mean, I just assume it was something like, hey, they haven't come back as soon as we expected. Go check on them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it definitely highlights the relationship here. The head honcho dad is at home. The workers are out in the field, and here's the son who's going to go check on the hired hands out with the flock. I mean, I think that's kind of the message that it's sending, that you can't trust them with the flock. You need to send a member of the household, of the family, to go check on them.
And be sure to wear your nice coat.
Yeah, be sure to wear your nice coat while you're out there.
Yes.
So I mean, it sends a message that you guys are like hired help, and I'm going to send my son to check on you. And oh man, it's just going to make it so much worse. So Joseph doesn't even know where they are, right? He has to find a man's like where'd they go, and then the man says, oh, they've left, and let's go to So they went to Dothan, and of course they recognize him from a distance. Why? Because he was blonde and blue-eyed? No, probably because he had that stinking coat on that was so distinct that they could spot him from a mile away. They saw him coming.
Let's not forget the man in the middle, however, because he gets to where they're supposed to be,
yeah,
and he doesn't find them.
Yeah.
So there'll be good reason at this point for Joseph to return back and say to his father, they're not there. They've gone someplace else. But we've got this man who is interjected into the story for the sole purpose of saying, oh, I know your brothers, and they have gone even further away. This is where you'll find them, and off he goes.
Yes.
Which leads at least Dukan in his commentary to suspect that this was a providential person. In fact, he even goes so far as to guess that this might even be an extraordinary being who is leading Joseph, because there's a purpose in Joseph leaving home and going through what he's about to go through.
Yeah. And it could be, I mean, it should be noted that Dothan is actually back on the way toward home. It's north of Shechem, back towards Hebron. And it's not like a direct road, so it's very understandable why Joseph would have missed them. But it's clear they're kind of making like a circle around. And without knowing, it could be very dangerous to be out there on your own, not knowing where your family is. I do think it was providential that he met this man and helped him on his way.
So you're equating Joseph's disappearance to the Bermuda Triangle. I now see the picture here. Okay.
Everything's a triangle. It's a symbol of the Illuminati. Okay. Anyways, so they see him, and this is the pejorative term, right? Here comes this master of dreams, they say. Let's kill him, throw him in one of the cisterns, and then say a wild animal ate him. Then we'll see how his dreams turn out. So the dreams and the coat are the two things that irk them the most. The dreams, of course, are the reason to kill him. They resent that, that his dreams are going to turn out this way. But the proof of death is going to definitely be that coat. It's unmistakable that this was Joseph. It symbolizes Joseph. It's so wrapped up in their imaginations that Joseph and this coat and Joseph, that it becomes party to their crime.
Is there also something here? I mean, this just struck me, but is there something here in terms of not judging another person's spiritual experience? I mean, there's no reason that I know of for these brothers to assume that these dreams are actually from God. I mean, other than you got Jacob, who, his father, who's saying, okay, here's how I'm going to interpret that dream. But I mean, you've got 11 brothers here who hear all this stuff, but they haven't had any dreams.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder if this is also a little reminder about us being careful not to judge the spiritual experience that someone else might have.
Yeah. I mean, to be sure, they should have been open minded to consider whether these dreams were from God or not. I think when your life is so blinded by this favor being shown to this person, when you have so much hatred over it, how are you going to see this clearly and not interpret this as another power grab? Now we're going to rope God into this scheme and claim it's all
Mm.
his idea. It's so hard because contextually, all the evidence is kind of pointing in one direction, and then this dream happens. Your tendency is going to be to keep that momentum of interpretation and see it as a negative thing or a scam of some sort, a further scheme from
And
from
maybe throwing God into the equation of what appears to be a power game, like you say, just makes it all the more irritating and worse.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like you saw in that old movie Kingdom of Heaven. It's not an old movie, but some years ago, about the Crusades. What do they say before they go out? God wills it, and they work themselves up into that frenzy. God wills it. God wills
Yeah,
it. You know what I mean? And it's like
yeah,
you're now justifying what's about to happen.
yeah.
Um, so, I mean, it's easy, I would imagine, to come up with a dream. Especially, I don't want to get all into it, but the Chaldeans had dream manuals where if you dream this, it means this, and that means that. It's kind of like an industry. It's not just this kind of woo woo thing of like, what does it mean? There was some science behind it where this tends to mean this and this tends to mean that. And so, it would be easy to say, well, I know if I dream this, it probably means this. That you could accuse somebody of conjuring up a dream knowing how most people would interpret it. But there's always an element of unknown there as
And
well.
speaking of conjuring, just want to throw
Yeah.
this out. You opened up by talking about how dreams were big in the ancient world.
Yeah.
I both know that dreams today are just as huge, along with things like astrology. Uh, I remember reading. In fact, I put it into a sermon one time. Cosmopolitan magazine had figured that it was something like 60 or 80% of its viewership these days are into astrology. So consequently, the magazine went to putting about 6 to 8 pages that are related to astrology into their magazine. And I think it's safe to say that even when it comes to dreams today, you can go down the city and you'll find a couple of houses with signs out in front saying palm reading and such like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all of this stuff today is just as alive as it was
Mhm.
back then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People are still looking for these kind of back doors by which we receive communication from the spirit world or the divine or God or whatever.
Yep.
People are still looking for those avenues. Absolutely correct.
Yep.
Okay, so they want to kill Joseph, but then when they see the Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, they decided, what's the point of killing him? We could sell him, which, you don't really want to give him any moral credit for that change of heart because it's purely selfish. It seems, why? Maybe there was a pang of guilt there. Okay, let's sell it. And it's really interesting that it's the Ishmaelites.
Yes.
Really interesting.
These are these not our cousins?
Yeah.
Or our second cousins? Are these not the people of our great uncle?
Yeah.
So it struck me this week as I'm thinking about this. You go back now and you talk about Isaac and Ishmael, and Isaac's the child, and Ishmael's the second one, and such. Now here we have a story where you have the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, who see what Isaac's descendants are doing to their own brother.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
This is God's line. This is the messianic line.
Yep. This is the chosen line.
Whoa.
Yes.
Whoa.
Absolutely. And it's just really interesting that like the Ishmaelites will end up they're not quite saviors. They just kind of happen to be here. And one would assume by divine appointment, by the way, I think that they had come just in time because it was God's will for Joseph to survive and go on to do other things. That they were led to this moment at this place by God. It's not stated, but one assumes. And God still has a plan for those children who were rejected. And I think that plan continues out through history. We've been drawing a line to the present day. Well, this isn't quite the present day, but as you know, because you've been really interested in the Reformation and been to Germany and things like that. Humanly speaking, Martin Luther would not have survived if it wasn't for the Muslims invading Europe and getting close to Vienna, because the papacy realized we need all the help we can get from Christian Europe to hold them back. I better not anger the princes of Germany too much because I need their help. And, here's another way in which, in some way, shape, or form, by a winding path, descendants of Ishmael are also instrumental in preserving what I think is a very positive spiritual movement, the Protestant Reformation. So, indirectly, again, not major characters in the story that we're telling, but they're here and they deserve a place in this story of appreciation.
Now, I'll just throw this out just for those who like to run off with unique ideas.
That's everyone who watches this.
We do offer that once in a while here. But now you have the Ishmaelites, but then you also have, and maybe I'm not even supposed to use the word also, but then you have the Midianites. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go to Dr. Dukan, he'll point out that these are one and the same group, that one refers to its ethnic origin and the other one refers to its nomadic condition. I've got no problem with that. I trust that he's much wiser and skilled in this than I would ever hope to be. But I did find it interesting that it talks about the Ishmaelites and the brothers start talking, but then a couple verses later it says, so when the Midianite merchants came along. Now, if I didn't have Dukan's statement to lead me to see the same as both groups as the same, I might question whether initially the brothers saw the Ishmaelites, recognize them as distant relatives, and are thinking, hey, maybe we dump Joseph on them. And then they don't do it. And when the Midianites come along, they say, that's it, we're doing this. So I just thought it was interesting. The text allows you to see them as potentially two separate groups. But I will stay with Dukan here. He probably has it down right.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that they take the special tunic, the robe, and they dip it in blood of a goat's blood. You kind of wish they had CSI back then. And I think it's really interesting that, look, clothes are very, very valuable. We see gifts with Naaman. What does Elijah's servant want? Changes of clothes. And Jesus' crucifixion, they kill the guy. What do? The soldiers roll for his clothes. You don't just dip clothes in blood because then they're done. You're not going to wear them again. You don't just ruin clothes like this for no reason. This is and I think that's kind of what helps sell the deception. It's because no rational person would do this. They are very valuable. It takes a long time to make these big robes by hand. You don't just ruin them like this. And so they ruin it. Such is their hatred for Joseph that they don't care. They ruin the clothes, and then when they give it to Jacob, they say, it's really interesting. They say, I'm looking here, verse, here it is, 31-32. Then they brought the special tunic to their father and said, we found this. Determine now whether it is your son's, not our brother's, your son's tunic or not. They act like we don't even know if this is his. We don't really pay attention. I don't know what he wears. What am I, my brother's keeper? They act so disinterested, and yet we know that tunic was a constant thorn in their side And now they act like, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse of the relationship between the brothers and the father, that maybe they're not telling him all of what they feel about
Did,
Joseph.
didn't you just get done telling us that they saw him coming from afar off in this tunic and
Yes.
recognized him?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're playing coy here with dad. But you notice they're not openly challenging him. They're playing dumb. They're acting like everything is fine with them. They're just being good servants. So, Joseph was sent to kind of go spy on them, keep an eye on them. In the end, what happens, because they sell their brother, is that they come back and act like we were keeping an eye out for him. Oh, we found this tunic. Oh no, this is bad. And it also kind of is a subtle way of casting some shame on dad here, because it's like, how reckless do you need to be to send your son out, a 17-year-old boy out alone? We all know there's lions around here. Samson's going to meet them. It's not the most dangerous place in the world, but you just don't go out alone. There's robbers, there's animals around. It's not the most responsible thing to do. And, so I think there's an implication of, yeah, we found his coat. A wild animal must have gotten him. I wonder who would have sent him out alone. That probably wasn't the smartest thing to do.
So let me throw something by you here that I don't recall ever reading in the lesson or the commentary, but it just strikes me. Is the story here of Joseph a precursor, if you will, of Christ? Now, I find it interesting at the end of our lesson. We actually have a little bit of a reading there from Ellen White where she is putting Joseph and Daniel together, and there's a lot of stuff here between Joseph
Sure.
and Daniel that's similar.
Sure.
But I'm thinking here that Jesus shares the story about the owner sending out the son, and the prophets kill him. We have the blood on this tunic. We have Joseph, who, well, I'll use Ducan's own words here from his commentary, that he is the future salvation of Jacob's family. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a part of this that does not come out in this lesson that deserves more consideration.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's a worthy critique. It is, and I suppose the final thing, I realize our timer's out as usual, and we're on Monday. So
Yeah.
I think the final thing I'll say about Monday is just the reaction of Jacob here. He appropriately tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth. Okay, that's what you do. And then it says all his sons and daughters stood by him to console him. And so there's some the appropriate duty of your children, but he refused to be consoled. Now, it's interesting that it's not the sons that are needing to be consoled. It's not, for losing their brother. It's not the daughters. It's the dad who needs to be consoled for losing his son. But he refuses to be consoled. Like, I don't want to feel better. I don't want to get back on my feet. I don't want to process this grief. I want to hold on to my grief until I die. And that's not healthy. Okay.
No, but I'll tell you, and I don't know if this is just part of working in the chaplaincy with hospice, but and maybe just going back to what you were saying, some reflection on the on this tragic situation with these children in Texas. But I do believe that there can be such a love for an individual that you just cannot go on. It just literally destroys your being. And to cap this off, I would even share that my wife was in tears last night when she was hearing over the news about a husband of a teacher who had been slaughtered in this incident,
Yeah.
and he collapses. And so I give that to the father here, that he has so much love for Joseph that there can be no comforting.
Well, I mean, I I hear what you're saying. I don't know if it's. I mean, it's definitely love. I also just kind of wonder if he's made an idol out of his son, kind of like Abraham was in danger of doing with Isaac before the trip to Mount Moriah, where God wanted to check Abraham and say, hey, you realize I'm the one who secures your promise, not your son. You need me if you want to realize this promise. I don't know. All I know is I think the setting of this scene, the importance of that line about his sons and daughters standing by him, he's acting like he's only got one son and he lost his one son. And these other people who are standing by him trying to comfort him mean nothing to him. Maybe I'm taking that a little harsher than is intended, but I think when the writer of Genesis adds that detail that his sons and daughters stood by him trying to just comfort him, and he refused to allow them to comfort him, he's acting like he's lost everything. And I heaven forbid, I don't want to be in the situation of that spouse or that teacher in Texas at all. I don't want to go through that. So I can't say with authority here what this experience is like, but he lost his favorite, but he didn't lose everything.
Well, but he almost has. Think about this. In Jacob's mind, the future, I mean, prophecy, the future is wrapped up in this boy. So, I mean, it's not just losing the son. This boy is everything. I mean, sure, granted, there's some poor parenting, issues here, but
Yeah,
still, this boy represents everything.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. But look at it. Look, Abraham had one son. Isaac had two sons that we know, that are prominent in the Bible. Jacob has 12, and a bunch of daughters besides. Like, he's got so many avenues now. This promise of becoming a nation is finally apparent. Like the math is starting to work out. We went from 1 to 2 to 12. Like, okay, we're doing great here. Yeah, you're okay. You lose one, and that is tragic. I'm not trying to take that away. And maybe you're right. Maybe he really. But the thing is that Jacob saw Joseph as the favorite long before there was a dream. He had chosen him through no apparent reason, other than the fact that he loved Rachel more, and he loved his firstborn from Rachel more than the others. I mean, there was no indication from God that it had to be Joseph at this point. And that only comes just before his death, apparent death,
But you do use that word love, with Rachel.
He did. So some fault gets put at Laban's feet, right? Because he, in trying to solve his own problems of marrying off his daughter, he has just compounded this problem. So now Laban's issues merge with Jacob's issues, and and it makes a mess out of all this thing. And
now you want to jump into Tuesday and deal with Tamar, huh?
Yeah, I mean, Jacob, buddy. Oh, let's go. I don't know what to say about this story. I just, by the way, end of 37 here, as you can see, the very last sentence is that Joseph gets sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials. So we're seeing like a descent of Jacob into grief. It's really cinematic. And then while he's grieving, we have a cut and we see Jacob getting hired by a very prominent family in Egypt. And that's kind of foreshadowing, right? But then we take a little break. It's a little tiny little scene in a movie that hints at something more that's to come, that maybe not all is lost, right? But
now here's a little relationship between Joseph and Daniel. So you bring up Potiphar, and Potiphar's name means he whom Ra has given. Ra is the sun god. And so it's very interesting that Joseph is going to be leaving the land of his forefathers, the land that is promised by his God, and he is now going to the man whose very name suggests we don't worship the God of your land, we worship the sun.
Yeah.
And you got the same thing that goes on with Daniel as he comes into this new world, and it's like, we're changing your name, we're giving you one of our God's names here in Babylon. I mean, so here's one of those similarities between Joseph and Daniel.
Yeah, and of course, Egypt has this symbol in throughout Genesis of the place where the patriarchs go to, probably when they shouldn't be going down there to escape whatever difficulties they may face in the promised land. And God's constantly being like, go back to the promised land, go back. Well, now his brothers are sending him back down to Egypt. So already thematically, it's like, that's not where God wanted him to go. It's not where God wanted his brothers to send him, of course. Okay, so back in Israel, walk us through this Judah and Tamar story. What is going on here?
Well, here's what I'll throw in, and I feel like this story is sort of like Dinah was in the last study. I mean, all of a sudden they just drop in the story with a woman, and you hit it, and then you move on. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's really fair to Tamar or Dinah, but here's what I find is unique: is that what comes out of this mess of sexual relationships is the birth of Perez, who is part of the genealogy of David. So
Okay.
talk about how God just keeps on working with confusion and messes. It's truly amazing. But what really struck me out of this, and I think it was Ducan's commentary, where it was pointed out that you have key women like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah who are matriarchs. Okay. They're not
Mm-hmm.
in the lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Who is in the lineage are other women that you wouldn't expect to be there. And as Ducamp points out, all these other women who are part of the lineage of the Messiah, they
Yeah.
all have what he called highly irregular or even suspicious marital relationships, which, guess what?
Yeah.
So does Mary, the mother of Jesus. So it's really pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. That's this overall view of how God works through this mess, and there's no doubt about it that this is a mess. I mean, uh, I like how this is. We focus on Judah, one of the brothers of Joseph, and I like how he named his son Ur. They say to Ur is human. Anyways, so what I think is really fascinating is verse 7, where it says, Judah's firstborn, was evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord killed him. And you think, what did he do that hasn't been done by this family? Did he kill somebody?
Yeah.
Because you know what? Hey, Judah, I don't think you got your hands clean from that one, or from being associated with it at least. All right, so he says to Onan, right? Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill the duty of the brother-in-law. And of course, we're going to find laws about this. And then, of course, the Sadducees are going to ask Jesus about this law about, you gotta sleep with your brother's wife if he passes away in order to preserve his line of descent. And so Onan, of course, refuses to do it. Little trickery here, and so the Lord kills him too. And you're like, suddenly God's very active in punishing sin. All of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, walk us through it. What happens with Tamar here? Who is Tamar?
And I'm going to plug my PC in here before my battery goes dead. So this will be one little spot where you're going to want to cut it.
Okay.
I thought it would last longer. I was wrong.
That's what Onan said.
We must be burning up this battery today.
Yeah, well, we are. We're putting in some time here.
Well, yeah. And I mean, this is all video and everything else here.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought I should just go ahead and do that. All right. I am back in place.
So let's pick up where the question was. Who is Tamar and what's going on real quick in this story?
I'm letting you take this one.
Oh, okay. All right. So
it's a handball.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, the short version of this story, the short version of the story of Judah and Tamar is that Tamar, of course, was Ur's wife. Anyway, so of course dies, and then Onan is supposed to sleep with Tamar, and he does wrong, and so God kills him too, and so now this woman is twice widowed because she has, she has a great taste in men, and or at least I should say the wrong men have taste in her, and so it's just not working out. And so at some point, Judah's wife dies. Okay, we like to think that these are all little kids. They're not kids, right? Judah's a dad trying to he's old enough where his kids are married and all that. So Tamar then, she's like, hey, find me another husband. And maybe the idea is this girl's bad luck. Maybe people are not realizing that it's the Lord who is killing these husbands for being evil. And so Judah's not in a hurry here to marry her off to another family member because, he's going to go through all of his sons, it seems. They're all going to be killed. She's a black widow, we don't want to, so he's just taking his sweet old time on this issue. And so finally she gets fed up, dresses like a prostitute. Judah notices her, they sleep together, and she takes a little token. So then she appears before him later. This is the very, very quick version, right? So he's told, your daughter-in-law Tamar has turned to prostitution, and as a result, she's become pregnant. And what does Judah say? Well, bring her out and let her be burned. Y'all need to just slow your roll on the bloodthirstiness here just a little bit, okay? Right? Because it's like, how dare she? She needs to be faithful. Well, to whom, Judah? Because you're not hooking her up with a husband. Like, what do you, it's like, well, he's all incensed. I mean, if this isn't an indictment on the modern political party, I don't know what is. Anyways, and so, while she's getting brought in, he's like, well, who are you sleeping with? Who are you playing a prostitute with? And she shows him the little token that she had taken from him. And he's like, oh, I see. What does he conclude? She is more upright than I am because I wouldn't give her to Shelah, my son. He was not physically intimate with her again, right? Like we done now. And so she has twins here. And that's where Perez, as you were talking about, comes from. And then there's Zerah as the other son. But we're seeing how this dysfunction is yet again entering another generation. You may resent Dad, Judah, but he ain't much better.
And it's just amazing that we keep on reducing these stories and situations to just one little page in the lesson.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you possibly cover this in Sabbath School?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to cover this in Sabbath School because, there's a teacher out there like, you know what, if I'm running out of time, we're going to skip Tuesday. But, it's just like, who are the good characters in these stories? Who are, you cheer for somebody in one story and then you meet them in the next story and you're like, yeah, no, not that one. Right. So, this just gives us a little bit of insight into Judah and his life. But when we return to Joseph, the commercial break is over. We return to Joseph here in Genesis 39, which I'll get there here. And Wednesday's lesson, Joseph a slave in Egypt. So finally, after like an hour of talking, we're going to get to Joseph and Wednesday and Thursday here in Egypt. Now, you had mentioned him working with Potiphar, and he kind of gets promoted in Potiphar's household. Again, we need to check our modern American definition of slavery. It certainly was not a glamorous thing back then, okay? But this slave, it's not a direct parallel to the race-based chattel slavery that we had in America. It's just a whole different thing. Again, I'm not saying it's better or good, bad, whatever. I'm just saying it's different. So what we think of slavery through the Civil War and all that, it's a different thing.
And we find the thing all the way up into Greek culture where slavery was it was everywhere, and slaves in those cases could live in pretty good circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, certainly most of them didn't, but there was an opportunity. If you were honest and good and had some luck, there was an opportunity. There wasn't a class distinction of like you're not human because you're a slave. There wasn't that at all. At all. In fact, because the ruling elites were such a narrow group, sometimes being a slave was kind of a way to get into the halls of power because you can't change your birth, right? But you can, if you want to get access, being a slave sometimes was the way to do it. you can avoid the power politics of it all and all that. But anyways, so Potiphar purchases Joseph from the Ishmaelites. So there must have been something in Joseph. Maybe he was used to keeping his shoulders high as a his father's firstborn, that he kind of carried himself in such a way that Potiphar, the captain of the guard, said, I like his bearing. I want him around. But Joseph was he says he was successful. The Lord was with Joseph, and he lived in the household of the Egyptian master. And his master observed that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he was doing successful. Now we're getting a little hint here of Jacob with Laban, where Jacob was no slave, but Jacob was very successful in managing the flocks, and so Joseph is as well. And so Joseph keeps rising through the ranks. It says Potiphar appointed Joseph overseer of his household, put him in charge of everything he owned. Everything. Wow.
You know, going on what you were just saying there, I was rather struck by this interesting statement from White in the Book of Education. And she begins the paragraph, in the crisis of his life, and then I'm wondering, well, which crisis is she referring to? And then she goes on, when making that terrible journey from his childhood home in Canaan to the bondage which awaited him in Egypt. So we know that this is en route, okay? And then she goes on to say, Joseph remembered his father's God. He remembered the lessons of his childhood, and his soul thrilled with the resolve to prove himself true, ever to act as becoming a subject of the King of Heaven. And so, you know, when you talk about him keeping his shoulders raised and such, regardless of maybe his lack of wisdom as a young person and how he came off to his brothers, this is a young man who, again, like Daniel, knows the true God, is standing for the true God, and goes into this new land. Daniel was the king of the north. Now we got the king of the south. Okay, if you want to have a little fun with that. Okay. Hello, Daniel 11. Okay, so anyways, he's much like Daniel in terms of his resolve in going to his place, and it must have shown for him to be placed in a home such as Potiphar.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting. It's like, why does Joseph shine here in a way that he doesn't seem to shine at home? I mean, undoubtedly, like, did he not possess these skills at home? How many years have gone by at this point? It's hard to say, but you know, in his home context, he seems foolish. He seems a little reckless in terms of just blurting out his dream in front of people who very obviously did not like him and would resist that. In fact, in front of his father, you show respect to your father and your mother, and the implication that they're going to bow down before you was even too much for an indulgent father to bear. And yet he gets to Egypt, and suddenly he's very responsible. You would think you would have to be very tactful and very wise in Potiphar's household. Very, very delicate in how you handle things and knowing your place and getting along with people. I mean, you don't see a spoiled brat going to be the manager of Potiphar's household. He would not last very long at all, right? So
yeah,
he seems to have learned.
Seems that Providence has chosen, again, like Daniel, has chosen to send the right man on this mission.
Yeah, but if I met Joseph and his brothers, I would not think Joseph was the right man for this mission. So it just goes to show you,
what you get for thinking.
Yeah, what you get for thinking. You know what's best, just based on what we see as human beings. So we look at this great tragedy that Joseph went through, but this tragedy made Joseph into the person that God wanted him to be. And without this tragedy, I don't know that Joseph would have grown up in the way that he grew up. In fact, I know he wouldn't have grown up in the way that he grew up. He had to learn to work with other people. Undoubtedly, there were a bunch of other servants who had been there longer than Joseph who would resent his rise, just like his brothers resented his rise. Joseph had to learn how to get along with them and to treat them with respect in a way that maybe he didn't learn at home. And now with Potiphar, he's actually got a father who isn't going to give him a free pass. a father figure, I should say, who isn't going to give him a free pass, that Potiphar expects him to work and expects him to do well. And he's not going to get he's not getting any freebies here. He's not getting a cloak, a robe, a special robe, So he kind of ends up attaining the same position he had at home as the kind of the second in command. And yet he did it of course, by God's blessing, but he does it in a more mature way, or, he handles it in a more mature way. So he's, it's basically his second home. He's learning the lessons he should have learned at home, couldn't learn at home, maybe because his father was so, uninvolved or sabotaging this, but he needed this structure to grow up. And he gets it in Egypt, unfortunately. Oh,
I wanted to just throw in a little teaser here and say, well, this is why we send our kids off to academy while they're still young.
But you wonder. I mean, this is a sermon here someone could preach. Hint, hint. How many people need to leave the family of God, so to speak, which is dysfunctional sometimes, and go off to Egypt to learn the things God wants them to learn? Don't always discount it. In general, in Genesis, God doesn't want his people going to Egypt. They keep going. He doesn't want them to go. But sometimes God's like, well, you know what? This is the only place I can work with you. I can't work with you at home because the promised people are so dysfunctional and whacked up that I need to get you away from them, or I need to allow you to be away from them in order to work on you.
And so he sends you off to Australia.
Yeah, he sends you off to Australia. Ellen White joke for those of you guys who get it. Okay. So there's problems in paradise, and I think this is the reason why the Judah and Tamar story is mentioned just before, because you see Judah, Joseph's brother, not able as a patriarch to manage things well, but also not able to keep his own stuff together like his father's. He's just sleeping around a little bit, and in this case, he thinks Tamar is a prostitute and sleeps with her. But Joseph is going to face the same temptation of sorts, hugely different circumstances, but same temptation of sorts with Potiphar's wife, and say no. In fact, he doesn't just say no. It says, even though she continued to speak to Joseph day after day after day. This was not one temptation. I think sometimes we can resist temptations when they hit us in the face, like, Matthew, go murder that guy. It's like, no. But when you have a quiet hatred building up in your heart day after day after day after day, it doesn't need to be in your face. It's leading you down a path where you won't even recognize that temptation for what it is. This is a wearing Joseph down kind of temptation. It's not like, hey, Joseph, sleep with me. Here I am naked. There's probably some flirtation. There's probably some suggestiveness. She's wearing him down. And it says he did not respond to her invitation to go to bed with her. That's a nice way to put it in the Bible. But he's just like, I don't want anything to do with this. Day after day. It's easy to say no at first. On day 1, maybe on day 2, on day 3, on day 4, on day 5. But at some point, you know what? I can get away with this. That thought's got to be there. Because you know what? I'm saying no and nothing's happening. I'm not getting rewarded by Potiphar. He doesn't seem to care. He doesn't notice anything. I could definitely get away with this, and he wouldn't even notice. I mean, that temptation could be there, but Joseph, nope. He's drawing the line, and you're like, I like this Joseph. Where did this Joseph come from? Well, anyways. Okay, so as we can see, that's not enough. She makes a false accusation about Joseph. So it goes to show you, sometimes you can say no to a temptation, and people will still accuse you of giving into it anyway. And it was a believable temptation, right? Because this is where we can draw a parallel to slavery in America. Because if you had a slave or a freed slave, and a white woman would be accusing them. My wife and I just went up to Chicago to go see To Kill a Mockingbird, the Aaron Sorkin version of it. And so, what does that story all revolve around? An accusation of a white woman against a black man, and a freed black man. But it's like, who is the public going to believe? Who are you going to believe? Potiphar's wife or a slave from a foreign country? I mean, come on. Of course you're going to believe Potiphar's wife. In fact, you have to believe her if you're Potiphar, because by not believing her, you embarrass yourself, because you're suggesting your wife, is capable of this kind of promiscuity, and that makes you look bad as the head of the home back then. So, you have an incentive to believe her. Now, maybe he, in his heart, he knew what his wife was like, but publicly, he's got to side with her. And, so this is it. So he gets, what happens to Joseph? Joseph's master took him and threw him in the prison. So he was there in prison. It's the most profound sentence in all the Bible. He got thrown in prison, so he was there in prison. Really? All right. So, but once again, Joseph, with the warden, he shows himself worthy. I'm sure the warden, knows that people get thrown in prison back then for a lot of reasons other than they did the crime. There's a lot of political prisoners that probably get thrown in the Pharaoh's prison. So the warden necessarily isn't going to discount Joseph. He's like, hey, he's a guy of ability, so let's put him to use here. So, okay. That's all I got for Wednesday. Anything you want to add to that diatribe?
No, I want to get to the number 7. I've been waiting all day for this.
Okay. All right, here we go. To Thursday, and I'll move it over to 40. Okay, lead us off. Let's talk about these dreams.
We got 7 cows. Have we not noticed week after week after week the importance of numbers, and especially the number 7 just keeps on popping up? So you see the hand of providence in story after story after story after story.
Yeah.
So for those who think that the book of Revelation just has all these 7s, I say go back to the beginning of the book, read through the stories, and you'll be surprised how often the number 7 is used.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was my 2 cents worth.
All
7
right.
cents worth. 7
All
cents
right.
worth.
Oh, come on. I knew there's some kind of connection to Revelation here. Okay.
Well, here's something I do like.
And
that is so Pharaoh has these dreams. Okay, so Joseph has already had his dreams. Now Pharaoh's having his dreams. But just like, I think aren't you doing like a sermon series on Daniel? Yes. Okay. See, all these things kind of go back to Daniel, between Joseph and Daniel, a lot of similarities. So in Daniel, as you know, Pastor, and as you're teaching, I'm sure, through your series, you have God who speaks to Daniel through Daniel 7 with all these beasts. Okay.
Daniel, what chapter?
Daniel 7.
Oh, 7. Okay.
Yeah, I thought I made a mistake.
No.
So here, these beasts, these amalgamations of critters and stuff, which is totally reprehensible to a Jew. I mean, that stuff fits Daniel as God communicates to Daniel through a dream. But going over to Nebuchadnezzar, he speaks Nebuchadnezzar's language with this idol and the gold and silver and expensive metals. And so we find the same thing over here with Joseph. And I like where Dukan had brought out, here was Dukan's words, God was speaking the language of Pharaoh's culture. And so once again, we see God meets people where they're at. Are you the king of the north? I'll talk to you as the king of the north. Are you the king of the south? I'll talk to you as the king of the south. Are you Joseph up here in Canaan? I'll talk to you as Joseph in Canaan. God meets people where they're at.
Yes, he does. And then the language that they would understand. And I think that's what you mean there. In the language right. So we see in this jail with Joseph, it says that Pharaoh was enraged with his 2 officials. Again, the rage of a king is something Daniel would understand. The cupbearer and the baker. It almost sounds like a Disney story or something. It's like, once upon a time, there was a cupbearer and a baker. So he imprisoned them in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same facility where Joseph was confined, and Joseph was to be their attendant, to take care of them. And anyway, so, I guess they get to talking, and these guys have dreams. And so Joseph's like, hey, I can help you out with those dreams. And who would have thought in all the mighty land of Egypt that there's 2 disgraced officials in a jail, another disgraced slave in a jail, and the 2 officials are going to have a dream, and out of this is going to come the salvation for the entire country and many besides. It's incredible to think about. I mean, if you're looking for a hero in this story, that's the last place you would look.
Right.
Yeah. And they're all sad, right? Because they said we both had dreams and there's no one to interpret them. Now, if they were in Pharaoh's court, they could just go ask the wise guys, please help me understand my dream. And, they would be but now it's like, oh no, something bad might happen to me. And we don't have any way to know for sure what's going to happen. The gods are trying to talk to us and we don't know what they're saying. So this is undoubtedly.
Hello, Daniel. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Daniel.
Nobody can interpret the dream, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So Joseph's like, don't interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me. That's a curious statement, right? It's like, don't these dreams he's accepting in principle that dreams come from God. And, for someone who's had his own dreams, it's like, okay. I see what's going on here. I understand. I'm not going to dismiss this. This could be really interesting. Tell them to me. I kind of got a thing with dreams. So they told the dream. Thankfully, unlike Nebuchadnezzar, they remember theirs. Anyways, we got the vine here and Pharaoh's cup, and then we have the Joseph says the 3 branches represent 3 days, another significant number in the Bible, and in 3 days you're going to be reinstated. Pharaoh's going to get over his anger, and you're going to be restored to your job. But hey, remember me. I think this is what everybody in prison says. Hey, when you get out, remember me. and when it goes well for you, show me kindness, which of course they don't do. Totally forgets about Joseph, at least at first. What does he say in verse 15? I really was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I have done nothing wrong here, which they should put me in a dungeon. I'm innocent, like everybody else in jail. But he really was. So anyways, then the chief baker is probably encouraged, right? He's like, our dreams are good news. They're always worried that they're bad news in the ancient world. They're good news. Okay, well, he tells him his dream, and then Joseph's like, yeah, in three more days, I love how the NET puts it here, Pharaoh will decapitate you and impale you on a pole. Then the birds will eat your flesh from you. It's like, Joseph, is there maybe a way of explaining this a little bit more gently? Can you imagine telling someone you're going to be decapitated, they're going to stick a pole through your body, and then the birds are going to eat your flesh? I just imagine being in that jail cell like, thanks, buddy. Thanks for putting that nicely for me.
Yeah.
I mean, man. Harsh. So those are the dreams that Joseph has a hand in interpreting here in prison. And of course, Pharaoh is going to have his own dreams, isn't he? And that's where everything really kind of turns in chapter 41. So let's get through this very, very, very quickly with Pharaoh's dreams. Let's see here. While I go there in the Bible, go ahead and tell us what's happening here.
Well, and again, I'm gonna show the relationship here between here and Daniel. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, the Pharaoh's dream here. We need to remember these are more than just a prediction. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Someone wants to go off and wants to pay an astrologer or a palm reader or whatever to predict the future. So be it. That's all you're getting is you're getting a so-called prediction. But in each of these, including Pharaoh here, this is more than a prediction. This is demonstrating God's actions in history.
Yeah.
God is at the center of all this. And even when we teach Bible prophecy, I think we have to be very cautious that we're not just simply talking about this is predicted and that's predicted. This is God working out his will through history. And he's given us this knowledge so that we can see his hand through history.
Yes, absolutely. And I wonder if God's hand wasn't behind the cupbearer not remembering Joseph. I wonder if God's like, no, Joseph, I know you wanted him to remember you and get you out of prison, but maybe Pharaoh would have said no. And in fact, let's kill that guy because what he did to my captain's wife was unconscionable, and then that would have been the end of Joseph. Maybe sometimes it's a reason that things don't work out with justice right away. That Joseph had to linger in prison a little longer for the right time, and this was the right time. So Pharaoh has these dreams of the 7 heads of grain and the cows and all that, and it says that he called for the diviner priests of Egypt and all the wise men. Again, just like Nebuchadnezzar, but they couldn't interpret it, just like in the story of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2. So then the chief cupbearer says to Pharaoh, "Today I recall my failures." I love how goofy that is. So anyways, he's like, well, then go get Joseph. Joseph interprets the dreams for Pharaoh. And, he's very careful to give credit to God here, right? It's not within my power. It's not me. But God will speak concerning the welfare of Pharaoh. He interprets the dreams for him. And then just in the interest of time, what does Pharaoh say to Joseph? Because God has enabled you to know all this, there is no one as wise and discerning as you are. You will oversee my household, and all my people will submit to your commands. Only I, the king, will be greater to you. And that's when Potiphar's wife says, "Oh, crap." That backfired.
Yes.
You got to wonder how Potiphar and his wife feel about this.
Yes.
I just one final little detail here I'll throw in, that 2 sons were born to Joseph before the famine came. Right, he marries Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the feminine version of Potiphar, one would think, and the connections are just interesting. So, anyways, one wonders how Potiphar's wife feels about that.
She had reason to be scared.
Yeah.
Potiphar didn't, but she did.
Yeah.
Okay. But here's something I want to make sure that I throw out before we close today.
Yeah.
One of the things that that really bothers me on social media, Facebook especially, is when you read these little memes that suggest that God is about to do something for you. Something is about to turn around. We come to the end. Well, we're not actually at the end, but I mean, Joseph is interpreting the dream. He comes out of prison. I mean, that's all good news. And we have many stories, just like Daniel. I mean, he comes out of the lion's den, right? The friends, they come out of the furnace. But those are the exception. Those are not the rule. And these memes and such that we see on social media that are almost like listening to the palm reader or whatever down the street. When we come to the book of Revelation, the saints are pictured as beheaded. The saints are the ones who have to endure to the end in the face of death. And I just think it's important that, as wonderful as some of these stories end up, such as Joseph here, that's not what happens for most Christians. And we can mislead believers. We can mislead Christians into thinking that somehow their relationship with God must not be right because things are not working out. And their boat is not coming in, and the finances or whatever, they're just, why is it me? Do I not pray hard enough? Do I not repent enough? I mean, what's the matter with me? And I just think it's so important that we understand that God has given us these unique stories where he has worked with certain individuals for his will. I mean, he's creating the line of salvation history here, but that is not the typical story of the true believer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Great statement. I think my closing statement would be something along the lines of, we see Joseph's fortunes up high. They start high, he falls, they rise again, he falls again, even lower, then they rise in the end. It's a roller coaster. But what's consistent, as Dukan points out here in the lesson, is, and I'll quote from it here in the bottom of Thursday, it says, "Thanks to God, Joseph goes on from ruler over Potiphar's house to ruler over the prison to ruler over all of Egypt." And I think maybe the word ruler isn't the word I would have chosen, although it's true. But he was faithful in Potiphar's house. He was faithful in prison, and he was faithful in Pharaoh's house. Whatever the circumstances did not matter. What mattered was the faithfulness. Whether he was given the kingdom or whether he was given the job of, cleaning cells and feeding prisoners, he was going to be faithful no matter what circumstances he found himself in. And that, I believe, is what qualified him for the future that God had for him.
Yeah.
So it's a good reminder.
Yeah.
It's like, man, even if you're down, even if you're not, you're not in a place in your life where I'm ruling over something right now, just be faithful. Just purpose to be faithful. And if it's God's will, you'll get out of that situation somehow, even if you're in it longer than you thought you should be, like Joseph in prison. Even if you're there unjustly or unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
just be faithful wherever you find yourself. And I think that's all you can do, and that's what we're called to do in these situations. And let God work it out. Let God work it out.
Yeah, and I like that statement I read earlier from education. The key word, true, remaining true to God.
Yeah, remain true to God no matter what, and let Him take responsibility for whatever success looks like in your life. Don't define it for yourself. Let Him define it for you, I think. Anyways, well, thank you, Jim, for a fascinating and long, almost an hour and a half long discussion on Joseph. And this is just the first of two lessons that we're going to have on Joseph. There's so much to say here. I feel like if we decided to do this for the next quarter, we're going to be like, all right, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's like there's so much in these stories. It's worth going through them. So thank you guys so much for watching. We do Sabbath School Boot Camp for you, for Sabbath School teachers when they're prepping for their class, and also for the front row type students. The students who want to get the most out of it, because we want to see Sabbath School classes succeed. We want to see them be places of growth. We want to see them be places where you are challenged to think and challenged to believe. And so that's why we do Sabbath School Boot Camp. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week when we talk about Joseph once again.